Welcome to Coffee with Dani and V. I'm V.
And I'm Dani.
Today we want to talk to you about relationships, holidays, and stress, and specifically the relationship with your significant other. You know, that person that you rely on, that person that you probably live with, that person who really knows you better than maybe you even know yourself.
Right.
So Danielle and I are both married. My husband's name is Tony.
Mine is John.
So when we refer to those fellas, that's who we're talking about. And we have both learned over the years. I've been married for 25 years, and you're
23.
Just had an anniversary.
23 years.
So we want to talk to you about the things we've learned, both through just experience, but also through some of the things that we've learned when we read about relationships, when we talk to other people about relationships, that we hope can help you navigate the holiday season with a little less stress and a little more connection with your partner. So 25 years. And you know what? We've been together as a couple for 30 years. And you guys have about the same.
About 25 years. So, yeah.
So that's a long time, first of all, to be with the same person. You really get to know them. But I still find myself, even after 30 years, of not knowing everything, which is fun and annoying. If I'm being honest.
Yeah, it's and I think too we can bring very different perspectives from a spousal, partnership. Our spouses are very different from each other. And have completely different even relationships as we talk about holiday stress and stuff like that. So I think that there's some good perspective there. But I also think that yes, we're going to talk about it through holiday stress, but this is a very good topic to even just for all the time. I mean, because relationships are stressful, it's
all the time.
There's different things that, play into, I think, what makes the holidays even more stressful. There's the holidays are stressful to begin with, right? So you've got gift giving, and I think financial plays into that too.
Absolutely,
and it becomes frustrating. But then also the extra pressure, of the holidays. So whether it's gift giving or buying or
family
whatever,
concerns, right?
Yes.
His family, your family.
Whose family, if they don't get along, are we going to this family, that family? Are we going to this family for the main and that one for the,
Right.
I see a lot of like one person's family's on Christmas Eve, the other person's family's on Christmas Day, So I think all of that though really gets really stressful because a lot of emotion plays into that, a lot of feelings,
a lot of outside pressure, especially when we're talking about, who gets the family with the brand new grandbaby on Christmas morning, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I remember that conversation. That was a toughie. And maybe we don't have to worry about those kinds of conversations now, but
it's gonna be.
I'm going into the age where, my daughter's going to be 25 next year. And when she has a baby, if she ever has a baby, she's like, Mom, don't count on it. But now I'm the one who has to be careful about putting pressure on her.
Yeah. Where
she goes versus do they go to her significant other, all that stuff, right?
I'm not going to worry about that pressure. The pressure's going to be there, kids. Just let you know. If you ever watch this, the pressure's going to be there.
So let's talk about our husbands. Okay. And just kind of lay out for you the kinds of people they are and the kinds of, women we are, so that you can get into a sense for our dynamics and what we're talking about here. So I'll go first. Okay. Tony is very, very intelligent. He's often the smartest person in the room, and I always feel like I'm a little less intelligent whenever he talks. Right?
We all do.
And he'll come to me and he'll want to have these really deep, meaningful conversations about philosophical viewpoints and everything. And some days I struggle to keep up, but I know it's important to him. And so even though it makes me feel like I gotta struggle to keep up, I do it because it's important to him, right? But he's also someone who can be very fixated on one thing for about 2 weeks, and then it's no longer relevant. It's no longer a thing, right? And that can be a struggle because I got to keep up. He has a little bit of, I think, ADHD when it comes to the things he gets into.
Yeah.
He is very social, wants to be out all the time. I am an introvert. That is not me. And so, a lot of times people joke with him, like half joking, half serious, that they think he made me up because they've never actually met me because I just don't go out. And so there's that struggle in our relationship. There's struggle in terms of how we raised our daughter. He was always, she has to be a functioning member of society and she has to contribute and she has to be intellectually challenging and blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, you know what? If she can just navigate adulthood, I will be happy. Because let's face it, that's a struggle for most of us, right? So that's the dynamic we're coming at. Extrovert versus introvert, someone who prizes intellectualism above all. And I am maybe not like that. Oh, and he comes from a family who was upper middle class. They had a nanny. And I grew up in a log cabin with barely running water and, wood stoves. And my dad was a fur trapper, so I learned how to skin muskrats when I was 8 years old, right? I didn't have a nanny taking care of me. Yeah. So we're very different in terms of how we expect to spend money, what we see the value of money as being, just a lot of different things.
So how do you, well, maybe that's next, but how do you see that contributing? Where are the stress points with those dynamics?
Yeah, so for us, it's always been he wants to do more, right? Have more. Always feels this pressure that we should be, and he's gotten actually a lot better over the years. But when we first started dating and we were first married, it was very much about the next step forward, the next push forward, the next level. And for me, I'm already doing better. When we were making $24,000 a year as a newly married couple, right? We only had the one income, and we had a baby, and we rented this very small house. And I was already thinking, wow, this is so much different and better, right? And I've always seen that everything we've ever had has always been so wonderful in my eyes, because it's not a log cabin in the middle of the snow and you don't wake up with frost on your eyebrows, which I totally, and I'm not saying that I was, my childhood was bad or anything, it wasn't, but that we just grew up very, very differently.
Yeah.
And so I've always approached it as, we have enough. This is great. This is fantastic.
So do you think that that's related to how many gifts to get or give or financial,
Yeah, absolutely. So it's weird because you would think that Tony would be like, we must buy the best and the most expensive, and right. And it's me who does that now.
Oh, interesting.
I'm like, well, and through the years, because I see how much we have and I want to give it away to other people. And that was a point of contention early on. It's not so much anymore. But definitely early on, it was like, how much is enough, and what things are good enough, and why are we giving them? And I think giving to the why of certain activities is really plays into the dynamics.
Yeah. Well, and I think that why actually plays into, again, as something to really look at and take into consideration when you're talking about stress with your partner through the holidays, is evaluating the why. Because there are such varying opinions coming in and life experiences.
And the why is not always obvious,
no,
right? You think you understand why your partner is saying we should do this with our money. But if you're not sitting down and really having a conversation and getting to the heart of it, then it's, it becomes like a balance sheet transaction rather than really understanding all the emotional crap that gets wrapped up in gift giving and finances and how you balance money.
Yeah. Well, and because the holidays are very emotional, because we have things like memories right, tied into it. So it's nostalgic. It's also the present. It's, the future too. So you're really hitting a lot of different emotions with the holidays, and especially around gift giving. And John and I are the same in the sense that we have a very divided household on, what Christmas is, I guess, too. Mm-hmm. And I think that comes into the why. And so I would say, to finish off on the why, not only is it understanding your spouse's why, but I think it's looking in and understanding your why. Because a lot of times we get caught up in, I'm right, they're wrong, right? So understanding their why helps you kind of put yourself in their shoes, right? Mm-hmm. It's that philosophy. But then also taking a step back, though, and really understanding your why can help you to see where you guys can meet, right? Mm-hmm. So it helps you evaluate, what can I maybe let go a little bit of, and what can I, what is really my true, thing that I want to hold on to that really gives me joy through the holidays.
Yeah. And that's the other thing when we're talking about finances, especially, I think it's so important to really understand if the way you're spending money is because it's expected, mm-hmm. or because it brings you joy, or the person that you're spending the money on joy, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. And that's a whole other level of conversation you need to have with your partner. If finances are something that's a struggle, right? And explaining to them, well, I really want to buy my mother this gift. Yeah. And I want it to cost this, I want it to be this particular thing that costs X amount of dollars, because when I was growing up, she always said this. You can't expect your partner to know that and to read your mind. But if you can really get to the heart of why something is important, then that conversation's no longer about who's right, but mm-hmm. what's the motivation behind it.
Yeah. And I think to that point too, if you're having a point of contention around one spouse wants to buy a really expensive gift, the other spouse doesn't understand it, so have that conversation and really try to understand the other person's, point of view, and articulate your, emotion or whatever that's tied around this. And I think that helps. So it's not just this person's mad because you spent this large sum of money over this gift, and you carry it forward. People carry grudges.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
It's hard not to, that's one of the things that I've really focused on my life, to not try to carry forward those grudges, because I think that it carries forward negativity. Mm-hmm. And so with John and I grew up in a middle-class family that was religious, but we still celebrated Christmas, and there was always this growing up contention around Santa Claus and no Santa Claus. And so we grew up kind of with this I grew up with this divided view around Christmas. My dad still wanted us to have, Santa, and so it was totally in his handwriting. He has a very distinct handwriting, and he would write from Santa on the gifts. But our church very much preached about how there was no Santa Claus, from a very young age. And it was, about Jesus and, the religious view of the holiday, mm-hmm. right? So we were very divided in that way growing up. But we still had like a Christmas tree, and we still got gifts, and that kind of thing. And so there was some nostalgia there for me, but, and there was tradition there, right? So we did still, we went and had a family dinner for Christmas every year. There was some traditions and some nostalgia. As I got a little older, a stepmom got involved, and she did things a little different around the holidays and made me actually appreciate the holidays a little bit more, get more into the holidays, even like decorating and stuff like that. And then I went, and once John and I were young and together and married, that was really, I have what I call my pseudo mom in Louisiana, and she is the one that introduced me really to my love of the holidays. I mean, multiple trees. There was a tree in the bathroom. Okay, there was a tree in the bathroom. And really, that is where my love of like, it was literally going into her house was just like a kid in a candy store. It was like just staring at everything in awe. And, you know, and that's how I felt. And that was, but now you have John on the other hand, and he actually grew up very religious, but in a sense that they did not celebrate Christmas at all. Mm-hmm. So, and not even like birthdays. So, you know, there was this very different, you know, upbringing. And I was the first one that really introduced him to Christmas. And although he liked it and maybe receiving a gift, he didn't understand it. And that was very difficult. That was something I very naively, we were young, getting married, and I very naively thought that I could teach him about the holidays and what that meant and give him that nostalgia, right? But that was very difficult for him, and it still is, because he didn't grow up with those memories. Now we've been together 25 years. He's had 25 years worth of Christmases, you know, and with our kids, and now he's getting it, right? So now it's a little more, but he still has that, I don't understand why we spend money. I don't understand why, you know, why we do any of this, because he just didn't grow up with it. So that was always very difficult. In fact, it was the most difficult on gift giving with me, because I did all of the gift giving shopping and for everybody. Mm-hmm. And there were many Christmases that I had nothing under the tree. And that was very hard. I mean, talk about like an emotional roller coaster. Mm-hmm. And I even remember, honey, if you're watching this, there was one time he told me, well, it's cheaper the day after Christmas. And I just about lost it. That wasn't the point, but he didn't get it. That wasn't how he was raised, right? So, I mean, not even with birthdays. So he didn't understand that piece. They didn't buy gifts for each other. They didn't understand that feeling of receiving a gift or giving a gift like that. Mm-hmm. And so that was, you know, very difficult for me and stressful for me. And that was one of the things that I really had to learn to let go. And also understanding. I had to understand why he was this way, right? Mm-hmm. Even though maybe we had 3, 4, 5 Christmases under our belt, and maybe he did buy me gifts for 2 of them or 3 of them, you know, it didn't make sense to me why one year over the other. Mm-hmm. Maybe I had something, maybe I didn't, but that was, I had to learn to let go. I had to learn to say, okay, I need to look at this. You know, why am I so hung up and need this gift? If for me, giving was my sole purpose for wanting to give through the holidays. It was me, and my giving heart. I wanted to give to others. I wanted to, you know, kind of like you, share what I had, you know, and do those nice things and for other people. And so why did I have to get wrapped up and feel emotional that I didn't get something, right? Mm-hmm. And but it's hard. You feel left out. Like there's all kinds of things that, you know, as much as meant, like when you sit back, it's like, oh, okay, it still hurt, right? So, you know, there was a lot of that, even down to the financial, like even to this day, I do all of the gift purchasing for the most part and the budget planning, because he doesn't understand the concept of taking that money and putting it towards gifts for everybody. But it's something that's important for me, and that's something he's kind of had to learn. But again, it was one of those scenarios where we had to take a step back and understand the why. You know, I had to understand why he was this way. Mm-hmm. You know, this was the way he was raised. It wasn't the same, you know, and to think that I could just change him, right?
It'll never happen, ladies. It'll never happen. You could wear him down over the years.
Which I've done a little bit. I've been able to get there. So, and the help with my kids being older now, so they understand and see. Mm-hmm. So my daughter definitely pushes him along on the gift giving side of things. But you know, it was very difficult through the holidays. And a lot of times even I felt alone through the holidays too, because it was so stressful and I wanted somebody to share that burden with me. And he just, that wasn't his thing.
Well, I think that's something that this is maybe overgeneralizing, but I think women do tend to take on more of the holiday to-do list, right? My husband is, some years he'll decorate outside, and some years he doesn't. And it's no big deal to him if it gets done or it doesn't get done, right? Does he feel like doing it? Then great, he goes out and he does it. Right. And if he doesn't feel like doing it, it ain't getting done. But I take on putting the tree up, making sure the tree gets decorated, right? All these other things that I feel like it won't be the holidays unless it's done. I can give up the exterior illumination if I have to. Right? But I think we do tend to take on the bulk of the to-do list. And I think that brings us around to that you were telling me when we were talking about this kind of stuff in our meeting recently, you were telling me about a book that you read, like his viewpoint, her viewpoint. And I really want to dive into that because I think it will be helpful here, because I totally do not understand how, like you said, 1 year you can be so into it and do the kinds of things that we expect you to do. Let's be honest.
Or we want you to do.
Yeah. And then the next year it's like, whatever.
Yeah. Well, and so even with that, like the tree decorating has always been my thing. And as the kids were younger and stuff, they would help here or there or whatever. But there was 1 year I remember John was totally into it. Like we went and bought this big real tree. He decorated with me, and it still lives in my memory, like this very happy time. But that was 1 year it happened. And I still hold on to it, and I hope like for the next year, and sometimes it can feel very let down and disappointing. But yes, there's this book, and I know probably a lot of you have heard about like love languages, which I also think is very interesting, to look at and looking at their love languages. And I think this plays into it, but it's a little bit different perspective. It's not necessarily considered like a love language, but it was a book called His Needs, Her Needs. And I do not recall the author's name, but I will put a link in the video or below the video. And this book really took a great approach at looking at the top 10 things that partners need from each other. Okay. And it can be sometimes that physical thing, it can be the emotional support, the communication, like there's 10 different things he goes into. But what I loved is he really looked at it from, yes, typically these 5 are women that have this need, and these 5 are typically men that have these needs. But he always gave the example and talked through it from a men's point of view and gave a men's point of view example, and then he gave a women's point of view example. What that did,
because these things are interchangeable, right? We shouldn't overgeneralize. We should look at particular behaviors for particular people.
But what it also did for me was when he put it in a women's perspective, even though that was a man's concern, I could then relate to it. Because sometimes when we're talking about things that a man needs, for instance, we just can't relate, right? So when he put it into a female, how it would relate to a female, it was like light bulb. Oh, now I get it. Like, so I loved that he really put that every example into, both perspectives. But what I really think that, even for the holidays, he also goes into things like finding common ground together and things to do together. So for you guys, for instance, you're very introverted, Tony's very extroverted, but you have to, and so many of us, we give what we need. Right? That's not what they need. So you're literally just throwing things at a wall. I mean, there's no, you can't expect. And that was really what I loved about this book, was he really drove it home and talked about, and he was a marriage counselor for years and decided that the marriage counseling world wasn't actually helping them survive and have a better relationship. So he wanted to develop this program. And so he goes through some books and stuff, but you really have to look at this and talk to each other and see what their needs are, see what your needs are, and then come together and understand that you're going to have to put effort out, because it's easy for me to give out what I want. It's effort for me to give out what you need, right?
Right.
And you have to think about it. You have to consciously think about it all the time. But it is really one of the things that has helped John and I tremendously, is understanding the need of the other person and being able to facilitate that. Because, so John and I are similar to you and Tony in the sense that he's actually pretty introverted too. Mm-hmm. In social settings, he can seem extroverted, but really he just wants to come home. Whereas I usually want to be home, but once I get into a setting, I love it. And I want to talk to people and I want to hang out and, whatever. And I have a hard time sitting still. That's my thing, is that I seem extroverted because I have a hard time sitting still. So being at home is not my jam. It really isn't. But I can do everything alone. That doesn't bother me. Mm-hmm. But I have to be doing constantly. And I probably get that from my dad. But so yeah, this book really helps you really think through and have those moments to sit back and say, okay. And it was clear as day that I was giving him all this affection because I wanted that affection back, thinking that, okay, if I show him all of this affection, he'll do it back for me. And it just didn't. Nope. Didn't work. Didn't happen.
So there's this interesting concept out there. And of course, I will forget the name too, because that seems to be going around today. Called bids for connection, right? And people who are in intimate relationships put out bids for connection, sometimes subconsciously, right? We don't even think about the fact that we're doing it. Like you were giving John affection, hoping that you would receive it in turn. That's a bid for connection. And we often do the things that we wish our spouse or our partner would do for us. Mm-hmm. We often do them as bids for connection, and we don't even realize we're doing it. So I'm glad you brought this up, because I think we can do a lot to improve the quality of our relationships if we start understanding what our bids for connection are and if they're being met or not, and being able to talk to why we need them to be met. Mm-hmm. And we also need to start looking at our partner's bids for connection. What are they doing for us or to us that clearly is an opening for the way they want to be treated or interacted with, or whatever it is. It's really interesting because when I landed on this article, and I don't remember where it was from even anymore, when I landed on this article, I was like, oh yeah. When Tony makes me coffee and brings me coffee in the morning and then starts chatting, it's not that he brought me coffee and he wants me to bring him coffee, although that's a fun activity. And if you've never brought your husband coffee in the morning, I recommend it. Anyway, so he brings me coffee, but then his bid for connection, right? That's the opening he uses, is bringing me coffee. But then the real true bid for connection is, let's talk about what we're going to do tonight, right? Because he wants to plan, he wants to be extroverted, he wants to go out and do something, and can he use the coffee to bribe me in the morning to say yes to doing something in the evening? And when I started making that connection, that's what he was looking for and after, that made morning coffee so much more delightful because I understood what he was asking me for, right? And I understood that when he said, I'm going to go do this thing at this place tonight with this person, it really was an invitation for me to come along. And when I when I realized that and said, oh, I'd love to go with you. Or if, and here's the thing, you don't always have to accept the bid for connection, but you need to give a reason why that's not going to happen, right? And a really obvious one is sex, right? Yeah. Your husband pats you on the butt as you walk by or whatever. Yeah. My husband does it all the time, pinches my butt. And some days I'm really into it, but there are some days when I'm not. And you have to like be honest with yourself. Okay, am I up for sex? Yes or no? And if I'm not, why? Is it just because I've got some sort of mental hang up that if we talked about it for 5 seconds, I'd be in the mood for sex? Is it because I have a raging headache and it ain't going to happen today, right? Be honest with yourself, because sometimes you've got some stuff going on that won't allow you to get to that bid for connection and say yes, when if you just were honest, you could get to yes pretty quickly. So when he would say, let's go have dinner with so-and-so, right, in the morning, or he would say to me, I'm going to go have dinner with so-and-so. He wouldn't say, do you want to go, right? I'm going to go have dinner with so-and-so. Okay, great. And if it was an invitation I needed to decline for whatever reason, I would say, that sounds great, honey. I hope you have a fun, fantastic time. I'm going to stay home and do this because I have this project I'm working on, or whatever it is, right? They need to know why you're saying no. They can't just be, no, I'm not going. Yeah. Right? And if you can have this honest conversation with your spouse or your partner and say, what's going on when I say this, or I pinch your butt when you walk by, what's going on is I really wish that we would do this, or you could say this, or you could respond this way. You need to be honest, because maybe they don't know that, right? This whole bid for connection is not something that we talk about, but it's something we all engage in. And if we just understood the activity and what was really going on when the connection was thrown out there, right? That potential connection, if we could just understand what's happening and say yes or no and why, then our relationships are so much better. So I realized this bid for connection thing about 5 years ago, and it made a world of difference in our relationship.
Well, and if you think about it, ladies, think about your relationship and going through the holidays. And if you took a minute to kind of explain why you didn't want to, go out to dinner, why you didn't want to do this thing, whether it's sex, whether it's this, whether it's that, versus just being constantly no, right? It's really seen as, instead of, fostering that connection, you're really dividing yourselves. And
I think it can get dangerous if you say yes when you don't want to.
Yes. Right. Well, there is that. And I think, yes, very much so. But I think, paying attention to and understanding, this might be one of their needs, and doesn't necessarily mean that you have to say yes all the time. But if you can understand that, then you can be more conscious about when you're wanting to say yes, or how you can help that, that need of theirs. One of the things that this book that I was talking about does go into too is, so it's His Needs, Her Needs, How to Have an Affair-Proof Marriage is like the underlying title. And what I don't like people to get scared about with that is, we're not going to have an affair, blah, blah, blah. But what it does go into is explaining how, if your husband needs to go out and have dinner and, and needs to be social, and he wants you to be a part of that, right? And you're constantly no, then eventually what happens is he meets somebody that does want to go out, right. And that can be a very innocent thing. Not that anyone's ever looking for it, really. I don't think that affairs, a lot of times people go out looking for an affair. It's that somebody has met that need at work, in a social environment, whatever, that you haven't opened your mind to, or realized, or had that conversation.
Or frankly, don't want to. And if that's the case, then, there's more going on in your marriage that you need to talk about.
But that's also where, if there's one of those things that you just can't, meet that need for whatever reason, if you can work on the other piece of that, which is finding things you do have in common and you do enjoy doing together, Maybe it's outside of the needs, but it's, I going and seeing movies together. Maybe it's going and playing tennis together. Maybe it's going and, listening to bands play. There's got to be something that you guys enjoy doing together, and you really foster and dive into that. And I think that too can help during the holidays. Mm-hmm. If you focus on those things that you guys do enjoy doing together and fostering those connections, something like that can very much, in my opinion, replace if there's a need that your partner has that you just can't meet, for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. So, and it's hard. Relationships are work, people. Oh, yeah. I think that sometimes too we get caught up in, it was easy at first, right? Love was easy because
it was driven by hormones.
Yes. There's this physical attraction that makes you not want to be separated. And you'll do anything for that other person, right? And then eventually reality hits, and life hits. Mm-hmm. And there's so many other things, whether it's kids, whether it's work, whether it's, hobbies that you have that the other person doesn't have that, seem to get in the way, finances, different things. And maybe it's even different political views. Maybe it's different wants out of life, mm-hmm. That's definitely probably even one for John and I, mm-hmm. He is definitely, because of how he grew up, he is like, what's the next big thing for us? And I'm more of like, I'm very content,
So Tony and I do an exercise every year. It's called the 25 things list. And it's the 25 things that you want out of life this year, right? So lists change from year to year. Sometimes things always stay constant, right? But it's a really interesting exercise. And I think it would be beneficial for people to do 25 things I want out of the holidays this year and compare their lists. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be 25, right? We do 25 because it lets us really dive into like physical health, emotional well-being, right? Travel. We run the gamut with the 25 things.
But I would say Tony's told me about this, and he says it has to be 25. He says it has to be 25
I disagree.
Because it forces you to really think through this and come up with, because I asked him about that. I was like, does it have to be 25?
Yes, but here's the thing. I think if you make the list shorter, mm-hmm. you really have to narrow it down. Yeah. I think 25 things is kind of a lot. And I have to really think to get to I usually wind up getting to 18 or 19 pretty easily. And the last 6 or 7 usually aren't all that critical to me, if I'm being completely honest. And I've told him this. But I think if you were doing the holidays, right, 25 things you want out of the holidays, that's kind of stretching it. You could shorten it to 10 or whatever it is. But I think it's a useful exercise because he's right. It does force you to really think about what you want, why you want it or need it, and what you're willing to do to make sure that those things happen and what you're willing to cut out. Mm-hmm. And when you compare your lists, I think people are usually surprised by how much they have in common on those lists.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great exercise too, because you can find those things you can connect on, right? That you do have in common, and it just reinforces the connection. Mm-hmm. And then the things that are different, you can have conversations and really understand their viewpoint, where they're coming from, your viewpoint, where you're coming from on those things. Do you think that it would also be a good idea, because I see this as that New Year's thing, right?
Oh,
that you
yeah,
do,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
At the new year, at the beginning of the year. But do you think that it would be beneficial to do that coming into the holidays as your year, looking forward, so that you could start as you're starting into this stressful time with this deep connection as to what you want the next year to look like, and maybe you can build that through even this holiday.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic. We usually do ours right around our anniversary because it makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. It's time to take stock of where we're at, and that's right in the middle of the year. But this year we didn't do that over our anniversary, so we're actually planning on doing that next weekend. So it will be interesting to see if it makes a difference through the holidays. We don't tend to have a lot of holiday stress anymore. we've been together for 30 years, guys.
Yeah.
If we haven't figured it out by now,
Yeah.
But I would say it will be interesting because there are still things that creep up, but and that's the other thing. We should talk about conflict styles. Maybe we can't get into that this time around. Could be a really interesting video to do, to talk about conflict styles in relationships and how you resolve severe differences in those, because Tony and I started off our relationship with severe differences in conflict styles, and over the years we've sort of figured out how to navigate that. But
yeah. Well, and I would think that all of these points really are good. I think we should do that. Did you see that? That was beyond one thought, and I didn't finish the other thought. So yes, I think that would be a good, because the conflict styles come in with John and I too, and how to deal with those different conflict styles. I mean, but I do think that this would be, you said that after 30 years, you think you've got it figured out. I wouldn't say after 25 years, John and I have the holiday stress figured out. I think it still approaches, and it still can feel very stressful, overwhelming, and even very dividing. And but the more we focus on making sure that we're trying to stay strong in our connection and focusing on those things, the easier it is to get through it. And sometimes that means too just being open and honest. Like now I have to tell John very much, if there's not a present under the tree, I am going to feel left out and very sad. But that's a yearly reminder. Honestly, it is for him, because that's just how it is. And so, and even gift ideas, like I have to give him gift ideas. And there were years that I even bought myself gifts. Like I was like, I'm gonna make sure I have something under the tree. But no, it's definitely, I think that all of these are really good ideas and things to remember and to be cognizant of with your partner through the holidays to help minimize that stress and refocus in on really what is important. And I think that's important too, is your relationship is really what's important.
Right.
And that is the best Christmas gift of all, and all of the rest, is kind of superficial.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So we hope that these, our personal experience and some of the things that we have read about and learned about over the years, help you go into this holiday season with a little less stress and a much more rich, full understanding of your partner, yourself, and how the two of you can balance each other out, get through the holidays together. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.